so happy we alive.
South Carolina, please let us know. We need every name of a person who's with us in South Carolina to recruit for this team. Maybe we'll get back to this later. Our panel today is entitled Getting to Legalization from Here. And what we hope to do in the next 90 minutes is to focus as sharply as we can on our collective task, on NORML's collective tasks of transforming what we know as marijuana prohibition to what will be known as cannabis legalization. We won't be talking about the horrors of prohibition or its inefficacy and things like medical and patients. We're going to be talking about engineering. That's the key word for this panel. This panel is about engineering. Engineering the transformation of policy from marijuana prohibition to cannabis legalization. We have a splendid panel to do that today, all of whom will get a more proper introduction in a few minutes, but let me just say, we have Bill Zimmerman from Americans for Medical Rights, Robert Lundy from the state of Washington has been very involved in initiative efforts there, Nancy Lord Johnson, who many of you know, former candidate for Vice President of the United States, a doctor, a lawyer. I'm recently informed she just passed the patent bar, so if anybody has any high-tech devices you want to talk to her about a patent, she's available. Jack Herrera, who certainly needs no introduction, but who's wearing a different hat today. And a very special visitor to us, to all of us, Jerome Thorell, a freelance journalist. He's not a marijuana reform advocate. He's here with his objective journalist hat remaining in place. He has come all the way from Paris, France to be with us here today, and we welcome him. Thus we come to the central issue upon which this entire discussion is premised, and that is, what is this thing called legalization? What is exactly this thing called legalization? Well, friends, I don't often have the occasion to make pronouncements, but I'm going to now. I'm going to tell you what legalization is. It's ambiguous. If you ask 10 different people what legalization is, you will get 10 different answers. Obviously, our opponents delight in defining legalization as the installation of vending machines for crack in school corridors. We have our own notions of what legalization is. I would like to suggest, for the sake of our purposes, and especially for the sake of this discussion for the next 90 minutes, that there is a definition of legalization. It's a broad one necessarily, but it comes down to this very simply. Legalization means not arresting people. I don't care if you're talking decriminalization, not arresting people. That's legalization. Now, within that, under that broad rubric lies a variety of policies. Decriminalization, regulation and taxation, other schemes as well. Personally, I don't care ultimately exactly how marijuana is regulated or not, as long as we stop arresting people. That is the sine qua non, in my view. That without which legalization is nothing, is stopping arresting people. Now, I might say, with regard to NORML's one of our mantras is stop arresting responsible pot smokers. That's what our advertising say, and that's why we exist, to try to encourage the government to stop arresting responsible pot smokers. That's our definition of legalization, and we've already said pretty clearly what we mean by responsible pot use. Using that definition is actually kind of effective, I have found. I'll tell you one story. I was stopped in the shopping mall recently by a lady of certain years who told me how nice it was to see me, and she'd seen my name in the paper about drugs or pot or something, and she thought I was a nice guy, but she just couldn't go along with legalization. So I asked her, I said, do you mean you think people ought to be arrested for it? Oh, no. no, we shouldn't be arresting people for marijuana, but I just don't like legalization. I said, well, then we agree, don't we? That's all I'm for. I'm for not arresting people. And she said, well, I guess we do agree. You're right. So I had another recruit there. When I do interviews and I'm asked about legalization, I never use that word. I always let someone else use it first. And then I ask them what they mean by legalization. Of course, they stumble around having clues what they mean by legalization. And then I suggest, well, let's just talk about not arresting people. How's that? Okay, that'll do. And then for long, you have everybody agreeing with you. Because I've rarely met people who think that others ought to be arrested for cannabis, at least willing to say that publicly. Before introducing Nancy, I want to say one more thing, and that is there's a peculiar phenomenon that's occurred in this discussion today. I mean, if you look back at previous normal conferences, we used to bring in state representatives and state senators and talk about introducing legislation, moving the state legislatures in the directions we think they ought to be moved. You hardly hear it. No one talks about state legislatures anymore, and what we're going to be talking about today is almost exclusively initiative efforts. State legislatures appear to have made themselves irrelevant in our cause, and we are going over their heads now and reaching the people very effectively. So with that prelude, let me say we'll be first hearing from Nancy Lord Johnson, who is going to talk about the international treaty impediments to legalization. That legalization, there's some major mountains in our path. Some of them are known are the international treaties, which we are often reminded of. She is going to be talking about to what extent those treaties do constitute an impediment to the achievement of legalization. And then we're going to talk about two sort of extreme approaches to legalization. One you might call the gradualist or incremental approach. Bill Zimmerman, the architect of reform, or architect of medical marijuana reform in 7 states, will be talking about the incremental or the nose under the camel approach, which of course he's not part of, you understand. And then we've got Robert Lunday and Jack Herrera will be talking about what I call the all-at-once approach, that is going directly at the state level to a system of regulation and taxation. And then finally, Jerome Thorel from Paris is going to bring us some news about what Europe looks like in terms of legalization these days, and how do the various European countries that have achieved substantial reform, what does legalization look like in all those European countries, and what can we learn from their experience? And so with that, I'd like to first introduce Nancy Lord Johnson, a doctor, a lawyer, and now a patent lawyer, a former candidate on a national ticket for Vice President of the United States, and a resume much too long to go over now. So a member of the normal board of directors too. Please welcome Nancy Lord Johnson.
Hi there, it's really good to be here. Thank y'all. I'm going to talk a little bit about the treaties, and to do that I need to kind of give you a history of prohibition and how we got to this point so we have a better understanding of how to get out of it. Drug prohibition actually began a lot earlier than most people realize. It actually began with FDA law. Well, when this country was founded, as most of you know, the government was very limited. It was very limited to regulating interstate commerce, and at the time what that meant is kind of commerce between the states, like they didn't want the states to put up duties between each other. And gradually that got expanded to the carriers until now it's virtually every type of economic transaction. Didn't used to be that way. Even the beginning of this century, they couldn't simply pass a law that people couldn't have a particular thing and get away with it. The Supreme Court used to enforce the Constitution. So how did they get around it? Well, there's a couple of different ways, and one of the ways I'm going to talk about is treaties. Treaties and taxes. That's how they do it. The very first law affecting drugs was a law passed in 1898. At that time, it only applied to the D.C., to the District of Columbia, and the territories. And that was a law on the unification of pharmacopoeia, which simply required that if you had a particular medicine, it had to be of the right strength, tincture, that it had to be what you said on the label. Interestingly enough, this pharmacopoeia, which was only about 25, 30 products back then, included opium, cocaine, and